All right, folks, welcome to our session on end-to-end network assurance. And for this, we are turning to Ross Cassan, Senior Director of Assurance Strategy at Spirent Communications. Welcome, Ross.
Thanks a million, Kelly.
All
Great to
right,
be
well,
with everyone today.
absolutely. It's great to have you. So let's go ahead and jump right into your presentation, and hopefully we'll have a couple minutes for questions at the end.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, so let's get into it. So if you're not familiar with Spirent Communications, we are involved in testing throughout the entire life cycle of a 3GPP service, from the beginning of time when a chipset vendor is working on their chips to the network equipment manufacturers building the RAN, building the core functions, to carriers starting to validate those and get them ready to deploy in the network, and finally moving into service assurance. So we have a great view of what's happening in the network. So every year we produce our view on 5G and share that with our customers. It's available on our website. But I just wanted to take a slide from that to show everyone kind of where we're at, and then we'll talk about the challenges related to that. So if you look at a generation in the mobile world as being about 10 years, we're about 5 years in now. So we're halfway there. And we can see there's a huge number of carriers that already have 5G non-standalone in their network, and everybody's really focusing on 5G standalone and the challenges that come with that. And that's what we really wanted to focus on in this session. So let's look at some of the challenges that we're seeing through our customers' eyes and the interaction that we have with our customers. Um, so just going to go around the clock here. So, the top challenges we're seeing are, the multi-vendor network. We're moving from, a single vendor or a few vendors to provide different functions to this new multi-vendor network. And we're also seeing uh, carriers trying to take the best from what we've seen at cloud scale and move to a higher release cadence, right? And use a DevOps cycle to move to faster releases. But that creates a challenge when you look at the testing cycles that were there in the past. We see that there's a transition happening from virtualization to cloud native. And so that comes with a lot of benefits, right? We've got vertical scaling to horizontal scaling. We've got a shift to Kubernetes that brings a lot of advantages. And that big shift from, kind of that waterfall approach where we're doing weeks, months, even sometimes years of testing before a function or feature is deployed out in the wild for customers to use, into a much more fast fail model. And then when we couple that with the last point, which is there's a fragmentation in visibility and monitoring, and we still see in our carrier customers that there's a silo and a little bit of a firewall between different functions of the network. So if it's, the RAN team, they're focused on the RAN, making sure that that's optimized. Of course, we have to connect to the RAN, so we need a backhaul network there, an IP network. And lastly, we've got the mobile core, where the brain of the network that's operating everything and then ultimately connecting us to our end destination is sitting. And we do see a lot of fragmentation between those groups in terms of how the network is being developed, deployed, and assured. So I really wanted to take the rest of the presentation and look at each one of these challenges and how, the leading operators are coping with these. So let's start out with that, multi-vendor network and the high release cadence. And so really the answer here is we've got to move into this continuous test, this continuous DevOps cycle that was pioneered by the cloud scalers. It's called continuous test, continuous assurance, active assurance. May have heard of it referred to as chaos engineering. It's all that concept of just continuously testing in the network and putting automation around that. And that's the cycle that we're showing here on the slide, is that we're continuously testing once we're up in operations. And if something starts trending out of the norm, right, that signature, that first robot gets triggered. There's a KPI threshold that's been tripped. Then we want to move into an automated fault analysis mode. And so we've got workflows that are going to be executed. We want to validate that, yes, that test failed one time. Can we repeat that failure scenario? So taking that test that was running it multiple times in succession to make sure that that failure is indeed um, actualized. And then when that is repeated, creating a workflow to identify, okay, well, where in the network is this occurring? Is it something that's specific to the backhaul or a specific core node? And really isolating um, for the next step, which is moving into an AI ops engine, which can then go make the necessary change and to close the loop. And this is kind of a little bit forward leaning. I think most of our customers are doing steps one and two, the leading kind of tier one customers that we have. Now, moving into that closed loop AI ops is where people are putting a lot of focus over the next few years and leveraging AI tools and learning with time as we develop these next generation services that are being deployed. But really trying to compress that cycle and go to that pass fail model, learning and then ensuring that service keeps going. So let's continue, around that slide and look at, one of the other key things that's enabling this is the move to cloud native principles and the CI/CD pipeline. And so this really starts with testing in the lab phase, but really putting this all together now. So the line between lab and live is getting really blurred. The timing is getting compressed between these stages, and we're putting a lot of automation around both steps as we move from lab to staging and into live operations. That we really create that cycle and leverage the cloud native capabilities. So things like horizontal scaling, so that we can scale up services, assign bandwidth where we need it, for example, to address that.
So just if I could just ask a quick question here, Ross, talking about this transition to cloud native, obviously that's happening in a few different forms across the industry, whether it's public cloud, private cloud, hybrid. Is there a difference in strategy or sort of capabilities when you're talking about those different types of deployments? Can you use the sort of same strategy and tools?
Yeah, absolutely. The tools scale across all of those examples, whether it's a private cloud running in the carrier's network, a hybrid cloud, or some carriers that we're working with are even looking at really leveraging the public cloud as much as possible. I think the model that we're seeing most of our customers look at is the hybrid example. So many of our customers are relying on uh, public cloud for additional scale. So if there's an emergency event, having that cloud there that can instantly scale out and support a service if there's a particular emergency and there's a spike in the network traffic and number of people trying to attach to that. And really, the key there is just making sure that service is there when it's needed, and just constantly testing to it. Just it's basically a continuous "Are you there?" message, and making sure that system is really there. So in such an event that it's required, that it's a seamless transition. And if there is any issue with it, that the carriers alerted to that before they need it. All right, so let's move on to the last issue, which is really breaking down the silos across the network and providing an end-to-end vision of the network. And this is really going to be critical for next generation services that we're seeing many of our carrier customers trying to implement as they get the base 5G services and the 5G network working. Many of our customers are trying to add on services like enterprise focused services, which require potentially even an SLA and things like network slices that go across the network. And so to provide that visibility, we need a tool that allows us to see the network from end to end. So when we run a test from the end of the network, if we do detect that there is a degradation, being able to quickly isolate where that's occurring. And that's what we're trying to demonstrate in this slide, is that ability to do what we refer to as segmentation and identifying, where in the loop the fault is existing.
Okay, so I'm going to break in here with just another question, because you mentioned slicing, and I think that some of the service assurance issues around that are really interesting. So, can you talk a little bit about, what are some of the challenges that are related to, ensuring that positive customer experience? You mentioned SLAs.
Yeah.
So what does assurance look like for slicing, or maybe even for something like FWA, which, is maybe a more foundational 5G service as well?
Well, so yeah, with both of those services, we're seeing an enterprise slant to them, or even emergency services being assigned to a particular slice. And that brings in a number of connotations, right, that we need to think about. So at the beginning of time, if we're delivering an enterprise service, we need to make sure that we're meeting the throughput, latency, jitter requirements of that service that we're getting to the end customer. So creating a burst certificate at the beginning of time for that service is critical. And then expectations of enterprises, especially if they're going to be moving critical applications like billing systems onto that network, they need to know that it's going to be there, and they're going to demand an SLA like they have today for their fixed line services. And so we have many examples of this. If you think of that slicing side as well, we've got some customers that are creating slices that are focused on ensuring emergency responders can get access to the network in an emergency event. And so that's a service that's not always being used, but when it needs to be used, it's really got to work. So using active tests to validate that service continuously is really critical. All right, so let's close out and just go over really what we're focused on with at Spirent. And so we've been building out our VisionWorks platform. It's a platform that we've been building on for about 2 decades, starting with those enterprise services and the build out of the network on the IP side, and transport networking. And now it's evolved into having that end-to-end view, and it really breaks down into that life cycle of a service being deployed. So at the beginning of time, being able to do activation and certification of the network, being able to provide the end customer, if it's an enterprise, with a birth certificate saying, yes, we're meeting the SLA that we've promised you. Once that's done and you start delivering the service, we need to move into a performance monitoring mode. We want to maximize cost efficiencies, and really ensure that we're detecting degradation before they impact customers and result in a network loss and loss of service, and move into that outage prevention. And so the next step there is that quick root cause analysis. So if there is a degradation detected, automatically kicking off that process to identify where in the network that's being occurring is critical. And then the last part, once you've identified the root cause, you have to fix it. You have to validate the fix that you've applied, and really future-proofing your network operations by automating those migrations and upgrades really pulls it together. And that's what we've been focused on with the VisionWorks platform, providing end-to-end visibility, proactive analytics, and automating that end-to-end troubleshooting cycle.
Okay. So I want to ask a couple of questions now that we're here at the conclusion here. But and one of them is around something that I think is sort of the top of mind topic in 5G these days, which is monetization. Um, and so let's talk a little bit about what some of the challenges are there. And I think it's important to also, I think, service assurance and testing is really foundational to monetization, because it's how you make sure that the things that you're selling to customers and that they are paying money for are actually working and meeting the expectations that you've established for them. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we see what's happening and where our customers are trying to go and adding new services, there's a really big focus on enterprise services and enterprise class services, right? Bringing fixed line customers over to fixed wireless networking, moving kind of legacy applications onto network slices. And again, these customers come with a very specific SLA vision in mind, and to be even allowed in the door at some of these large Fortune 500 customers, you have to agree to provide an SLA, and that's something that's brand new for the mobile network, right? We've had service level objectives before, but nothing like an SLA with teeth and penalty clauses in it. And to get some of those services over, that's really critical. So when we look at things like, drones flying around that are connected to the 5G network and relying on that for instruction set, that's a critical path that needs to be tested. Or similarly, that's that first responder example, or billing systems, really being able to um, connect customers and make sure that those networks are always on is a big area of focus for us. So I could give an example. One of our
Yeah.
customers, um, when they first started, their journey and they were enabling enterprise customers, they actually got a lot of success. They got up to about 5,000 different enterprise customers. And the way that they were testing it was by manual testing, right? So if they did a change in the network during a change window, they had engineers out in the field with handsets, and they were only able to test their top 10 customers when they made a change. And so we've now automated that to the point where they can test all 5,000 of those customers within a 5-minute window. So really optimizing that, and it's really flipped the script for that customer. They went from those Fortune 500 customers calling them and saying, "Hey, our network's down, we've got a problem," to flipping the script and then being able to call the Fortune 500 customer now and say, "Hey, you're no longer responding. Um, you better check out what's happening on your servers or your routing."
Wow, that's a huge difference. I mean, just the scale there is wow. I didn't realize that was sort of the scale of automation capability that we're talking about. That's interesting.
Absolutely.
Okay. So you mentioned sort of, seeing where that carrier journey was with one customer. Can I ask you just in this last couple of minutes to talk a little bit more broadly about, where you see carriers in general on this journey to, use this kind of service assurance and sort of that sort of hyper automation capability?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, most of the customers we're dealing with have started their 5GSA journey. They've got markets that are up and running with 5GSA. They have a base assurance capability, and active assurance has really come into the fore with 5G and the move to cloud scale. And right now, in terms of where our leading customers are, it's really focusing on, the next steps in automation, right? Really decreasing the amount of time that it takes to do fault isolation, getting that down under 5 minutes, making sure that not only can we detect a problem faster than, a cloud service like Down Detector, but also isolating where that problem is occurring in the network, and really trying to fill out the information that we're providing, so that it can be very quickly addressed. And the goal that we're moving towards is closing that loop, right? Providing enough information that an AI ops system could then take action on that information that we're providing. And we're really excited about the AI ops journey. And we see our role as being, the eyes and ears of that system.
Okay. All right, well, Ross, thank you so much. I really appreciate the perspective and the examples that you were able to offer us today. I really appreciate the time and the insights. And folks, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next session.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone.